All right, when you sort through players across the country and look at positional units, of course, the main concern is who have you lost, especially those guys going to the NFL draft that are that talented. But when you look at the ACC at running back, most of the big studs, they are back for 2016. So we've got a loaded list, and we bring in Robert Reinhard from Blogger So Dear, SB Nation, Wake Forest, and also Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC. Robert, ACC top five at running back, pretty good group.
Yeah, definitely a good group, and I think it says a lot that it's a talented group. That with my number five player, I'm actually going with a player from Clemson, and that's one of the most talented teams in the country, certainly. And so I'm going with Wayne Gallman of Clemson. Had over 1,500 yards last year, 13 touchdowns, averaged nearly 5.5 yards a carry. The only reason I'm going to knock him just a little bit, and this is sort of tough to do so. If you look at some of the advanced stats that try and separate offensive line play from running back play, which certainly still needs some work, and then he's not as strong in that category compared to some of the other ACC running backs, but still a very talented player. And had some excellent games against Oklahoma, Carolina, and Louisville throughout the season. At number four, I'm going with Matthew Days out of North Carolina State. Got injured against Clemson last year and then missed the remainder of the season, but was having a very good season up until that point. Only ran for 865 yards, but had 12 touchdowns and averaged 6.5 yards per carry. So if you would extrapolate that over the course of the season, granted NC State played some weaker opponents to start the season, but it still would have been a very impressive season, I think. So it will certainly depend on how he comes back from injury, but with that offense and being a senior, I think he has a chance to have a pretty good senior season for the Wolfpack. And number three, sort of a wild card, but a really great story in James Conner coming back, from his disease. It's great to see that he's cleared to play. Really remarkable story for him. I mean, in 2014, he put up just monster numbers. He had more than 1,700 yards, 26 touchdowns, averaged nearly 6 yards per carry. Just really remarkable stuff. So I expect him to be a workhorse for the Pitt Panthers this fall, and to continue to put up excellent numbers. At number two, I'm going with Elijah Hood out of University of North Carolina, former five-star recruit out of the Charlotte area, originally committed to Notre Dame. Big flip for the Tar Heels to get him. Had nearly 1,500 rushing yards last year, 17 touchdowns, 6.7 yards per carry. Can also catch it a little bit out of the backfield, and is in a high-powered offense to put up stats. So I think he's going to have another excellent season and continue to get some more recognition in the conference and nationally as well. And then number one, Dalvin Cook. He's unbelievable for Florida State. Had nearly 1,700 yards, 19 touchdowns. Is a breakaway touchdown waiting to happen. Outside of Leonard Fournette, I think he's the best running back in the country. I guess you can argue Christian McCaffrey, but he's a sensational player, and not much else to say other than he's just a special talent on a team full of really talented players. So that's my five, and I'm curious what you have to say, Mike.
Yeah, so number five on my list, we're going to have to go with Trayvon McMillan for Virginia Tech. Obviously, a guy kind of burst onto the scene last year as a freshman. Didn't really get regular carries until NC State in early October. He was getting some carries earlier on in the season throughout their games in September, but when Tech's offense really started to struggle, they tried to revamp the running game. They went with Trayvon McMillan. He finished the season with 200 carries for just over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. Really a stud at running back. A guy who I think is going to carry the load for Virginia Tech for years to come. Number four on my list, Wayne Gallman out of Clemson. Guy's a workhorse. He's a monster. He doesn't get as much shine as he probably should just because Deshaun Watson is so good. But Wayne Gallman is a guy, 1,500 yards last year rushing, 13 touchdowns, really is a dynamic player, can run the football, has the ability to catch passes out of the backfield as well. So Wayne Gallman's number four on my list. Number three, kind of interesting, Robert, that you mentioned James Conner. He's number three on my list as well, taking a little bit of a flyer on him also. Obviously a great story, cancer diagnosis. We all know the story. Battles back from it. A guy that hopefully is able to contribute just as much next season as he has in years past when he's been healthy. A guy that obviously didn't play much in 2015, but 2 years ago ran for 1,700 yards and 26 touchdowns. He's a guy that's a 2,000-yard rusher waiting to happen when healthy. I think he's going to initially split carries with Quadree Ollison there at Pitt, but I think James Conner is your starting running back if he proves that he's back and is healthy as he has been in years past. Number 2 on my list, Elijah Hood from North Carolina. For all of the shine that Marquise Williams got, and rightfully so last year, he was a sensational quarterback for North Carolina. Elijah Hood is really what makes that offense go. 1,400 yards rushing last year, 17 touchdowns. Caught a few passes out of the backfield as well, had 71 yards receiving on 13 catches, but he had some crucial catches late in games against Illinois, as well as NC State. He had a big 3 or 4 yard catch there at the end of that game that was huge in separating North Carolina from Clemson. So Elijah Hood, while he's known more as a rusher, he's a guy who can catch passes out of the backfield as well. Number 1 on my list, Dalvin Cook. I can't emphasize enough how good of a player Dalvin Cook is. A guy who fought through injury issues with that hamstring last year and still found a way to put up almost 1,700 yards rushing and 19 touchdowns. Cook is unbelievable. One of the top 2 or 3 running backs in the country, in my opinion. A guy is going to be an excellent pro when he comes out. There's a lot of hype given to Leonard Fournette, rightfully so. Christian McCaffrey, obviously a fantastic college player. The fact he's able to catch all the passes out of the backfield, return kicks and punts, do what he does. But if you want a guy that's durable, who can fight through injury, get you those extra yards, and run after a tackle, run after contact is huge in college and in the NFL, and Dalvin Cook gives you that. Despite his only 6 foot, 200-pound frame, he runs a lot bigger than that, and it's really hard to dispute that Dalvin Cook is one of the top 2 or 3 running backs in the country. So that's my 5.
All right, top 5 running backs in the ACC. Here we go. Here's my list. Joseph Yearby, Miami, gained just over 1,000 yards, just under 5 yards per carry, 23 receptions out of the backfield, so he scored 8 total touchdowns. Keep in mind, Mark Walton, as a freshman and up-and-comer last year for Miami, stole some carries away, and they have recruited a litany of very talented backs that could steal some carries as well. We've been breaking that down as well. So Joseph Yearby, the number 1 back in the backfield for Miami right now, but his role might be a little bit compromised, but I've got him at number 5. We talked about James Conner. You got to root for this guy regardless of who you root for on the field overall, for him to battle back from the diagnosis of cancer and get back into the lineup, not just being a viable person and the most important portion of that story, but back on the football field. And Robert outlined it 2 years ago, the ACC Player of the Year, and the stats are mind-boggling. At 26 touchdowns, that doesn't happen a whole lot across college football. That's getting into the end zone a whole bunch, which speaks to the Pitt running game and the reliance on Conner or whoever's back there. At the same time, it also speaks to his credit because there's not a whole lot of pressure taken off him or the Pitt running game by the passing game there, especially now that Tyler Boyd has moved on. The big 3 in the ACC, I think these guys have distinguished themselves. Let's start with Elijah Hood at number 3. My only, I won't call it a concern, but yet to prove himself in regards to being a workhorse back. If you look at his game log, there were only 3 games in 2015 in which Hood carried the ball 20-plus times. Very impressive, 6.7 yards per carry, 17 touchdowns. He's an exceptional back, combination power and speed going into his junior season at Chapel Hill. I love Wayne Gallman. I think he proved a lot. He didn't necessarily have the number 1 job nailed down in August. He won the job, and then he rips off 1,500 yards for a team that goes to the national championship game, 5.5 yards per carry, 13 scores, 1 in the passing game. And really, it was early on against Louisville, a key game for Clemson in which Deshaun Watson struggled, one of the few poor games he played in throwing 3 picks, that Gallman picked it up from there in a close win on the road, 24-21. Gallman hit up Louisville, one of the best defensive fronts in college football, for $140, and then down the stretch, 187 against North Carolina, $150 against Oklahoma in the college football playoff semifinal. Will not read his stats against Alabama. It was pretty ugly, 14 for 45. but did catch 3 key passes on scoring drives against the Tide defense. Well, we could mention, because the names come up a couple times, Leonard Fournette against Alabama, 19 carries, 31 yards. And finally, we go with the consensus pick across the board in Dalvin Cook. Definitely one of the top 3 running backs in college football, with McCaffrey and also with Leonard Fournette. And you guys ripped off the stats. He will continue to improve. Hopefully he gets some help from the passing game. But there was a portion of the season last year against teams that you would think Florida State would put away. Robert knows it well. Against Wake Forest, that was a touchdown game, and he only carried it twice because he was hurt. Yep. One of those, a 94-yard touchdown run that proved to be a backbreaker. Otherwise, Wake stays with Florida State. South Florida was giving Florida State fits in the fourth quarter. He runs for 266 in that game. Miami had the lead, as we talked about in the quarterback video, with Brad Kyle lighting up the Florida State secondary, and he rips off 222 against the Canes in that victory. So he not only just glossed up the stats in meaningless games, he hit it when they needed it at 7.4 yards per carry. Dalvin Cook, one of the best in the business, coming into his junior campaign in 2016. All right, real quick, guys, your running games there, respectively, at Virginia Tech and at Wake Forest. Mike, what do you have coming back? I know that Trayvon McMillan crashed the 1,000-yard barrier and looks to have an even more successful year coming up.
Yeah, Trayvon McMillan is the de facto #1 running back for Virginia Tech. The Hokies have had the situation over the last couple of seasons where they've kind of shuffled around in the backfield. They've shuffled around quarterbacks. They haven't had a consistent offense at all. It's really been the Achilles heel with their team. It's put a lot of pressure on the defense that, of course, hasn't looked quite as good as it has in years past because it's been on the field so often. Trayvon McMillan gives the Hokies a true #1 back that they really haven't had since David Wilson left following the 2011-2012 campaign. A true #1 is huge for Virginia Tech. They had too much shuffling going on in the backfield, so having him as a #1 is huge. Behind him, you're looking at guys like Marshawn Williams, if he's healthy, Shy McKenzie, of course, as well. There are a lot of talented young guys coming through the pipe, but Trayvon McMillan is the #1 running back for Virginia Tech, and it's really exciting to see what he's going to be able to do under Justin Fuente's offense.
Robert, we talked about it when we previewed the Wake Forest situation in the backfield. You had a couple of freshman backs last year produce. The yards per carry not going to blow anyone away, but the offensive line with little support. And it's a bright future for Wake Forest when it comes to playmakers on offense, and specifically in the backfield.
Yeah, the backfield is definitely interesting. There are a lot of pieces there, and you only need a few of them to hit. Tyler Bell and Matt Colburn, both true freshmen, both true freshmen last year. Both averaged a little over 3.5 yards a carry. That's not that impressive by itself, but if the offensive line improves, that could be an intriguing position moving forward. Have two freshmen coming in, and Cade Carney, who was very impressive in spring ball, has excellent spark rating, so he's an excellent athlete. And then Arkeem Byrd, who can be an explosive player. He's out of the Georgia area. And then Rocky Reed, a redshirt freshman who was originally committed to Tennessee. I'm not sure he ended up with a committable offer there, but ultimately chose Wake over Louisville, West Virginia. So had some pretty strong offers coming out of high school. So he could be an interesting power back for us. So really a number of pieces, and hopefully, it all comes together and they can put together at least a solid run game to keep drives alive and just keep staying and have a chance to convert on third down ultimately.
And a few other guys worth mentioning around the league heading into 2016. John Hilleman with a huge year for BC 2 years ago, 11 touchdowns, banged up last year, back in the fold for BC. TJ Logan backs up Elijah Hood, but think about his numbers heading into the North Carolina Elijah Hood-oriented offense. He ran for 533, 582, then 400 last year, but 6.1 yards per carry. He scored 13 touchdowns in his career. Mike mentioned Quadree Ollison there at Pitt. He stepped in week 1 when James Conner went down after like 10 carries first quarter against Youngstown State and gained 1,100 yards, so we talked about him. The two really impressive performances by Ollison, 152 against a very stout Louisville defense and a $122 against Virginia Tech, 2 games that Pitt probably wouldn't have won without him, and they won 2 of those games to get them to bowl eligibility. Brandon Radcliffe at Louisville, kind of a downer year for him last year. His yards per carry, total yardage, and touchdowns went down, but this is a guy that gained 700-plus yards and 12 touchdowns 2 years ago for the Cardinals. All right, top 5 running backs in the ACC. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.